Hi, everyone. Jill Novak here with one of my juicy conversations. This one I've been waiting a long time for because Suzanne and I have been chatting about having hard conversations and when people disclose hard things to you. Suzanne and I met, I don't know if that's where we met, but that's where we got to know each other was when you did yoga teacher training with Fireweed Yoga. And yeah, I've learned so many ways in which Suzanne's skill set is very opposite to my skill set, and in so many ways so complementary. So I think we're just an example of how the world works good when every type of person is in it. Suzanne works for Alberta Health Services and is a mental health clinician. And she is also a facilitator with the Grief Recovery Method, which she's been running those programs in Cochrane now for over a year.
I think maybe 2 years. I've had 3 groups over that period of time at Alchemy. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so Suzanne, I reached out to you because I think I reached out to you right around the time that it was Bell Talk Day. Mm-hmm. Is that what it's called?
I think so.
Yeah, and it was just this idea that we're starting to, as a culture, really encourage people who are going through hard things to talk about them. And what my experience has been with that is that, so I think it's fantastic. People are starting to talk, people are starting to ask questions and to come to people they trust and share things that are hard. Mm-hmm. And what I found as someone who's been accused of being a bright sider and someone who's always pulling the silver lining out of things and highlighting what's still okay is that that's not always the tool set that we require when we're coming to the table to share something hard. So I first wanted to just give you that and say, what are the tips and thoughts that you'd give to someone like me who's a constant bright sider for how I might approach these things with a little bit more care?
I think that there's a real place for finding the bright side. And a lot of times I find that happens as a conversation progresses. Once a person's heart has been heard, then oftentimes they too will start looking for the bright side. Not always, but often. And that's a beautiful time to kind of just chime in and join along with that. But you're right, at the beginning, a lot of times people are not looking for that. They are wanting to have their hearts heard. And what it is that they have to say usually isn't something that feels light and bright to them. And the Grief Recovery Method, they talk about this because most of us are taught this when we're little. And let's say we get hurt, someone gives us a cookie, or someone does something for us or says something to us to try to make us feel different. And then, so we take that cookie or whatever it is, and yes, we feel different. Our leg might still hurt, but we're distracted now by the sweetness of the cookie, something like that. The person who is trying to make us feel better sees that we no longer have that same look on our face. And so they think, oh, phew, my job is done here, right? I've made it better. And yes, there has been a help in some way that has happened there. And sometimes that type of distraction might be very appropriate. But oftentimes what happens is even though the person looks different, it doesn't mean that the underlying issue has actually been fixed. And so, for example, with a kid who's, scraped their knee or something like that, even though they might feel different, you might still need to bandage up their knee. You might actually need to address what the underlying issue is. Sorry, hold on 1 second. Jasmine, honey, you got to go out. Okay.
What happens on Zoom calls?
I made all these plans to have my family out of this space, and I knew it wasn't going to work. I'm just grabbing water. Okay, we're recording now, so go. Okay, hon? I get a little bit distracted sometimes. So, okay, so you might still need to address the underlying issue, right? Like the leg might be bleeding or something like that. So it's the same thing with a heart issue. Yes, you might be able to distract them with a joke or with an alternate view, but if you haven't done what you needed to do to patch up that bleeding heart, the person isn't necessarily leaving the conversation with you any better than when they came. And they might actually be leaving with a little bit more damage, perhaps, because the wound wasn't cared for in a timely fashion.
And because they tried, yes, and they showed you something that was vulnerable and hard, and you weren't able to receive that.
Yeah.
And so you made light of something, or you maybe were dismissive, or you found some bright side for them to focus on. So now they feel like even more that they can't show that piece of them.
Yeah. And I think that's such a common thing to do. And I think a big part of it is because we have been taught in our culture anyways, most of us, that caring equals fixing.
Yeah.
We are jumping in and we're trying to fix something immediately because we don't feel like we're doing our job if we don't fix it. And I just think that's a mindset that has not been helpful. I understand where it's come from, but I think that it does need to change, because that makes conversations then so much easier on both sides. If number one, the person doing the talking doesn't feel like they are being fixed, because most of us don't like that feeling.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, the person receiving, if they don't feel like they have to fix it, that removes this huge pressure. And so then you can actually just kind of relax into the conversation and go, oh, wow, how fascinating, how horrifying, how, whatever it is, and have those honest reactions without constantly thinking 3 steps ahead. Okay, so now what am I going to say to that? What am I going to say to that? And how can I possibly fix that? That sounds overwhelming. I don't know what to do. I'm panicking here. And then I'm completely immersed in my own feelings rather than actually being immersed in the conversation with the other person.
And a big piece of wanting to change is the uncomfortableness.
Yes.
Of receiving something, and the uncomfortableness of not knowing what to do with that, or not having an answer, or not having a simple solution, or a Band-Aid, or a cookie that you can give someone. When you don't have that, it's almost when on the receiving end, that uncomfortableness is what creates the need to solve or fix or something.
It is for me, for sure. And I find myself still regularly entering into that head and heart space. I'll sit down with a client and they'll start telling me something and my insides go, right? Because it's awful and it's horrible. And I immediately jump into that. Okay, so now how am I going to fix this? And then I have been doing this long enough now where I have that almost immediate reminder with myself, which is, Suzanne, you don't have to fix this. Yeah. A lot of times, and actually what's kind of odd, which is the way life goes so often, is oftentimes you are fixing it just by sitting there and being a heart with ears. That's another term that the grief recovery method uses, is being a heart with ears. And a lot of times that's what people need more than anything. So by just listening and honestly listening, and not necessarily, definitely not trying to fix it, and not necessarily even trying to understand, because that can lead us to asking a whole bunch of questions that take the person away from the storyline that they need to be sharing. If we feel a personal need to understand, we are going to ask what will feel to them like a whole lot of irrelevant questions.
Right.
Potentially. I know I've had that experience, and I've been on both sides of that experience. I can see where I've done that with clients or friends or family members, because I think usually it's because I'm trying to fix what it is that they're talking about. And so I feel like I need to have this full understanding so I can see where my solution would fit in.
I'm feeling that piece right there relevant in our cultural conversations today, even around the Indigenous school children that they're finding, and this idea that we want to figure this out. We want to listen. We want to understand. So, okay. So tell me then, if we're not asking questions to understand, and if the deep listening is where we need to go, I've got kind of a couple questions here. So one is that, what are those qualities of deep listening?
So I think we would always go back to being a heart with ears. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we can't ask any questions, because a lot of times if someone is coming to us, for a conversation is meant to be a two-way interaction. But for the most part, for me anyways, I find that if I move away from that attempting to figure out the details part and just sit there and listen and manage my own emotions, that's when the conversations seem to be the most useful. Like everyone seems to leave it feeling like there was an actual connection, not just an exchange of information and ideas, which really is what a conversation is. But if you want to go deeper into that, both parties to a certain extent need to leave feeling like their heart was heard.
So it's this idea really of holding space.
Yeah. And you know what, that again, like that's one of those, buzz phrases or something
Totally.
that I've never quite wrapped my head around what it is. I kind of think I know what it is, and I've read about it, and it does make sense to me in some ways, but it's not been something that's ever, it's just not quite the right words for me. But I think that what I'm often doing would fall under that category.
Yeah. You're reminding me right now of my yoga therapy training. When we went into this training, it was almost like I wanted a prescription. I wanted her to say that when your client comes to you and they have this, here's your prescription.
Oh,
When your client
yeah.
comes, and we were so frustrated in the beginning part of the training because she's like, I'm not giving you a prescription.
Yes.
Because you have to meet each client individually and they're all going to be unique. And
Yeah.
there's a prescription for this ailment in this person might be completely different than the prescription for this ailment in this person, depending on the rest of the package. And
Yes.
so yoga therapy session, I might find myself breathing with a client.
Mm.
So I'm doing a breath exercise and I'm watching them and I'm sort of waiting for their body or their something to shift in them to give me a cue that they're ready for the next thing. And they
Yeah.
could be sitting in this thing for a really long time and I'm getting antsy. My
Yes.
own emotions are like, okay, like how long or what's going on? How long are we going to be here? And then like I can override and be like, all right, okay, stop breathing. Now we're going to do this movement. And I start being prescriptive.
Yes.
And I find those sessions never work as well as when I sit in my own discomfort going,
Yeah.
I guess they just need to breathe.
Yeah.
Okay. And I just watch them and watch them and tune in, I guess, to it's almost extrasensory information or some other piece of information that isn't coming from my rational brain saying, okay, well, they're paying for this session, Jill, so clearly they need to do things besides breathe. And then I'll just watch tears fall, or I'll watch some shift in their body language. And if I allow that to happen, if I allow their body to show me when that feels complete for them, things always turn out better than if I put myself on my watch and my timeline and my business brain and my rational mind making all the decisions. It just feels like something more important happens.
Yeah. I think that you and I have the same, like, or very similar experiences in our lines of work, because that's what it oftentimes too feels like for me. Client will be sitting there, they'll be telling me their story, and then there will be this pause. And I get uncomfortable because I start to think, well, they're here because they want help, right? Yeah. And I'm supposed to be able to do that. And I'm a professional in this situation. And so what are they going to think of me if I don't have something to say right now?
We start building a story. Yeah.
I do. And it starts becoming about me.
Mm-hmm. And that's where, for me, that idea of hold space makes sense. Because as soon as, like you kind of said it, if I can take myself out of the equation and go manage my emotions somewhere else,
yes,
and wait for their body or their language or their movement to sort of show me that they're ready for the next thing. Yeah. Maybe that is what's being professional. Maybe that's what we did all the hard work to learn.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I had a thought, and then it went out, I think, almost as quickly as it came in.
Well, if I know you would come back. At the end, you'll be like, I remember the thought.
Yeah, I'll like email you later.
Yeah. Okay, so we're not solving, we're not fixing.
Not usually, although, like, I'm not sure what your experience is, but a lot of times I find that as the conversation progresses, then there gets to a point where it does seem like there's this natural exchange of ideas that starts to happen later on. After the feelings have been exchanged, then a lot of times people are open to hearing, like what someone else's take on it might be, what a slightly different perspective might look like. But I don't think it's that we can't ever offer those things, but a lot of times it becomes pretty obvious if that's what the other person wants, because they'll start asking. Yeah. Like, well, what would you do? Yeah.
And I do with yoga therapy clients, you will leave with a practice, like there's something that you practice here, whether it's a movement
Yeah.
or a breath or something that helps you to go into a place where your body can process.
Yeah, yeah. And I know, like when I'm talking with my friends and everything, a lot of times in those conversations, I want them to just hear me at the beginning, which they do. And then I do want to hear what it is that they might be imagining could be more helpful than what it is I'm doing under the circumstances.
So is that reframing?
Can be, for sure. A lot of times that is what I would say it falls under, for sure, because I'm just looking at an issue a particular way, given my history and my strengths and my weaknesses, and they're coming in with their own history, strengths, and weaknesses, and also too, a little bit from that third party perspective, which can make things a little bit easier sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think what's happening for me right now, it's almost like you're giving me this bell curve. It's almost like the first part of the bell curve, my responsibility is to do nothing but listen. And then like as we tip over the top of the bell curve, the responsibility might tip a little bit more into me. And that's maybe where if I can hold off the silver lining and the bright side or talk and everything like that, ride that until that other side. And then that's where that piece of the conversation fits a little bit more appropriately.
Oh, I love that analogy. Beautiful.
So what do you think the difference is between sympathy and empathy?
Oh, this is the question I was so glad that you sent to me earlier, because empathy has always rubbed me a little bit the wrong way. And I didn't know why until I started thinking about this. And so I looked up the definitions. Okay, so the definition of sympathy is feelings of pity and sorrow for someone who has had misfortune. And another definition of it is understanding between people and a common feeling. But then the definition of empathy from that same dictionary is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another, which is very much like the second definition given for sympathy. So I've always struggled with those two words for that reason, simply because they're very, very similar. But where my real challenge comes from is that if the goal is empathy, it's still about us. It's not about their story.
Yeah.
And it doesn't. And I've really learned this too with doing the grief recovery method over the past, 5 years. It doesn't matter if I understand.
Yes.
What matters is that I'm willing to accept that what you say is your experience, right? It's your experience. Unless I happen to think you are flat out lying to me, I don't need to understand. I don't need to think, oh, well, I've had a similar feeling at one time in my life. So now I can kind of put that, alongside of yours. And then I can think, well, this is what I would do given the fact that I've had a similar feeling. That's not necessarily even true. You might experience sadness. I might experience sadness, but we both have different histories. We both have different strengths. We both have different weaknesses. It doesn't necessarily even mean that we are experiencing that emotion the same way. Like, I'm not trying to discount empathy entirely. I think that's a beautiful part of our human relationships with each other, and that feeling of very deeply being seen and heard and understood. But I think it also too, it can be a little bit damaging in the sense then that we think that if we don't find someone who has empathy, who has that deep innate understanding and knowing of what it is that we've experienced, that we then can't have support. And I don't think that's true, because I've had certain experiences in my life that the people around me have not had, and I can still feel supported by them because I can see that they choose to believe me.
And I think this is where an interesting piece is, because I think sometimes if we can't empathize because we can't find the shared feeling, it's almost then that a defense rises in us.
Yes.
Because if we can't find it, then all of a sudden it's like, okay, if I can't find that empathy, then something must be wrong here. And then the defensiveness of our own experience rises up. And as soon as that defensiveness rises up, it's like the conversation's over.
Yes.
And so this is where it gets interesting for me, because it's almost like, okay, take empathy out. I might not be able to find a shared feeling here. And I can still choose to accept their reality, even though I can't understand it from my reality.
Yes. One of them, oh, sorry. No, go ahead.
No, you go.
Okay, I got very excited thinking about this. I've only read one of his books, but I read a book by Sam Harris called Free Will. And
Mhm.
that was very helpful to me because he did such a beautiful job. It's 80 some pages, but 20 some pages are footnotes. So it's really only 60 some pages that he took to make this point, and he did it just so succinctly and brilliantly, I thought. But essentially, if I, oh, Jill, I just lost my train of thought to a certain extent. But anyways, I'll keep going and see if it comes
Sam
back.
Harris, Free Will.
Yes. So if I was you, if I came, he doesn't believe in a soul, but he acknowledges that if people do believe in that, then you would assume that you would have come to this earth with that exact same soul as the person, with all of the same experiences, with all of the same strengths, all of the same weaknesses. Oh, here we go. But we would have done the exact same thing as that other person. So I can talk to someone and hear what they have to say and know that I don't need to understand it at all, but I can have some sense of heart connection, because I can know that were I literally that person, I would have done the exact same things, no matter how abhorrent or ridiculous or whatever word I want to put to it, I think their actions are. I would have done the exact same thing. And so I guess that could tie back in a little bit to empathy if someone wanted to say that they feel, empathy, but, just that feeling of understanding without necessarily having to understand.
Yes.
And really seeing the humanity.
Yeah. And I think this is where we're at right now in humanity. I feel like we're at this place where it's like, we're facing a whole bunch of really, really big things where the conversations that are happening between people come from very different life experiences and backgrounds and family histories and everything. And I think there's fear and defensiveness and we've been raised in this world of duality where if this is true, this must be false.
Yes.
And if we acknowledge your truth, then somehow it's shaking the foundation of my own truth. Yes. And this is what you're telling me right now, is that if we can get to a spot where we don't have to believe in the duality of that, that their truth can be whole and complete and absolutely true. Yeah. Even though our own life experience doesn't understand it. And that truth doesn't mitigate our own.
I love that. I think that's so true, because I definitely find myself caught in that a lot of times. Someone will start saying something, and again, I kind of have that, inside indrawn breath, because it does feel like this automatic affront or challenge to what I believe or what it is that my experience has been in the world. And when I can step back and say, oh, okay, it's okay. My experience has still been what it has been. It doesn't change just because they voiced what there has been. I mean, it can, and my understanding and knowledge going forward can change. And a lot of times that's the beautiful part about conversations. But I think you're so right that we just are kind of automatically approaching things with this idea that if someone else's reality is different from ours, that it somehow negates ours. And we're afraid of having our foundations shaken and blown away. Yes. Yeah. And so that's where the sort of, I can't believe you because it makes me wrong. And we're not willing. And yeah. I find too that I can't come up with a better word right now, but the healthier I get, the less I need those really strong foundations. Before, I needed a lot more black and white. Yeah. And so if you said something to me that fell outside of that, it was much more challenging for me to take in. Now, not always, but a lot of times now in comparison anyways, it's easier for me to go, oh, isn't that fascinating? Isn't that interesting? Yeah. Yeah. And I do find that I do think that journey into sort of feeling more whole in your own self, the more you can create your own community, your own support, your own places where you can go and have your heart heard, or other people's heart with ears. Yes. Receiving your truth. I think that the more we heal and the more healed we can be, then the more resilient or capable we are of receiving things that aren't in our own experience. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so this is my next question then. I'm wondering if I'm missing one. I want to know kind of healthy boundaries. Because I find someone, and maybe this goes back, maybe I'm actually stepping backwards to the whole, when you feel like someone's sharing hard with you, someone sharing something hard, and you go into auto mode of there's something I need to fix and do and da 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 da, then all of a sudden, sometimes you close off because you're afraid of how much energy you're going to have to give to this.
Yes.
You're afraid of how much you're going to have to give to this person or this issue or this thing that's now being shared with you. And you don't feel capable. And there's another reason why you shut down. So I think part of this conversation helps with that, because if we understand that there's not a fix and do and peace there, then maybe you don't feel the same fear. But what are some, I guess, healthy boundaries around this so that you can be the heart with ears in a healthy way for you?
Right. And I guess where my brain goes with that as well is acknowledging times where you cannot be the heart with ears. So for example, I can't listen to stories of animal abuse. I have some pretty good coping skills now that would help me to deal with the feelings that resulted from hearing that. But I was talking with a client the other day and just, it came up. And thankfully, her story was a short one. Had it not been a short one, I, for my own well-being, I would have had to say to her, acknowledge what it was I was hearing in her heart, and just let her know that I couldn't hear the details, and that if she needed to share those details, which she very well might, we would then need to find someone who was in a position where they could hear them. Because we can't all hear all of the details necessarily. I mean, if we can, that's great.
It's like some people can watch horror movies and some people can't.
Yeah, I can't, right? Like I cannot. I watched Seven when I was 18, and I slept with my sister for a week afterwards, right?
Well, and it does go, we look at the mental health of our first responders, right? Who walk into a lot of situations where they're exposed and they see, and they don't necessarily have the opportunity to set boundaries like that.
Yeah.
And so for the people who can handle it, maybe they're the ones choosing our first responder. Although I'd say, I don't know, someone who chooses to be a mental health clinician might also have a pretty high capacity for being able to receive.
I have a high capacity for certain topics and certain issues. And thankfully, I have a pretty high capacity for most of them. I think it's very useful when we're setting our own boundaries to perhaps give some thought as to what topics we aren't capable of hearing wholeheartedly at the moment, because that's also then gives us an ability heads up. Like, I can see this topic is very important to you, and I don't want to negate that in any way by not being able to listen wholeheartedly. And I just want you to know that there are things going on with me right now where my heart can't be fully open to the conversation that might be needed. And so, can we find someone who maybe can have that conversation with you? Like perhaps if you have it within you to be a support in a different way, maybe a practical sense, like, I can't be your listener right now, but can I bring you dinner?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Right. Because maybe
that's where it goes back to, I know in the Yamas and Yamas, when they talk about the difference between help and support. And help is or support, sometimes we feel like we have to help, and it's something that we're doing regardless of if they asked for it. We're doing because we think that's what we have to do, and that it comes from the whole fix it, I'm doing it. And support is really just like asking, what do you need?
Yes. Oh my goodness. Yes. And I'm so glad you brought that up as well, because a lot of times we don't think to ask what the other person needs. That being said, though, too, it's a little bit of one of those double-edged swords.
Yeah, it is.
Right? Because a lot of times people will say to someone who's experiencing something really hard, just reach out if you need, or let me know if you need anything. And they will almost never reach out, right? Because they are in their own emotional soup that's happening right then. They may not even know exactly what it is that they need. And they might not feel comfortable, right? Like, it takes emotional energy to reach out. And that's a lot of too why we say that. We're like, well, just reach out, because we're then taking away the need for us to extend our own emotional energy in reaching out. But if we see someone is suffering, perhaps if we're up for it, that is our role then. And so in the grief recovery method, they talk about right sizing your offer. If you do really, really well, then you might offer to babysit their kids or, come and clean their house. If you don't know them that well, that might be incredibly awkward and weird. So then maybe you'll bring a meal or drop off a gift certificate, or, if they're asking for thoughts and prayers, you will, make your message on Facebook about thoughts and prayers, or, whatever it is that seems to be correct for the relationship that you have.
Mine is always, do you need to go for a walk?
Yeah. Yes. And you've said that to me, and that has been so well received because I knew you meant it. Yeah. Right. We're offering something that I could tell you were up for giving. It didn't feel like it was being forced out of you, or that you were doing it because you thought it was the right thing to do. It was, the right thing to do perhaps, but something that was honestly living inside of you. And so
that one's an easy one for me to offer. Like, do you need to go for a walk? Yeah. And that's it. The walk doesn't need to have any expectations around it or anything. It can be whatever it needs to be in that particular period of time. But I know that one is one, that's a right size. You call it a right size offer. Yeah. That's a right size offer for me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that's such a beautiful thing, because there are so many of us in the world with different offers that will be right size for us and right size for our relationship with these other people. So we also too can oftentimes get it into our mind that I'm the only one who can fix this.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm the only one who knows, and I'm the only, right. And it's very rarely true.
Yeah.
Sometimes we honestly are in a position where if we don't do something, it could be problematic, but it's not usually like that.
Yeah. And if we can get out of our heads that it has to be all or nothing, that my right size offer is better than doing nothing.
Yes.
And that I remember being on a committee on a board for a sport once, and like almost burning myself out the first year, because every single thing that came up on the board, I was like, okay, I'll do that. Okay, I'll do that. Okay, I'll do that. And then by the time I was done, my first couple of years, I was like, I'm done. I got to quit. Yes. And I remember the guy treasurer coming to me and saying, can you not quit? This is your skill set. This is what we need for you. Just keep your hand down for all the other stuff. And don't raise your hand, because if you take away all of that, we're going to miss out on this one key piece that you bring that we really need. And we can find someone to do the other things that you just keep putting your hand up because you think you're the only one. Yes. But you could stay here and offer us that one key piece that you do great. It would really help us. And maybe if we could learn that lesson, it would be helpful for us all too.
I think so. I am starting to learn that lesson, and it's making my life a lot easier for sure. Especially with kids and stuff. It's like, oh, I can do that. I can do that. I can do that. And it's like, oh, well, actually you have a dad too, right? Yeah. I think it goes into all the different areas of our life. And then another thing too, I read this a long time ago and I can't remember where, unfortunately, but it was this idea about volunteering or about giving. And we almost have this idea that if it doesn't hurt us to give, it wasn't really a gift, right? And the writer was—
it has to be a sacrifice. It has to be done out of martyrism.
It does. And the writer essentially was like, that is so redonkulous, right? It's absolutely— your best giving is if it is something that you are fired up and passionate about as well, or in some way continues to fill your bucket, right? If you're emptying your bucket and nothing is bringing energy back into it, you're going to burn out. And that was it was the most common sense thing, but yet at the same time, it was this light bulb moment for me, because before that, I had honestly thought if it wasn't hurting me in some way, it wasn't honest giving. Yeah. And I grew up believing that I should honestly give. And I do value that. And I do like it, right? And I personally now quite embrace the idea that there's selfishness in it in the most positive sense of the word. And I'm quite comfortable with that, right? Like my job, it's hugely giving to me.
We need to reclaim that word selfish, don't we?
Yes,
we need to reclaim that a little bit as something that's not negative, but the more selfish we can be, the more whole we can be, the more we can fill our own cup, and know that in that we are also more capable of giving.
Yes. And definitely been true for me. The more I focus my energy on the things that I have true interest in, that I have a true skill set in, true energy for, the better I am at those things. And I found myself distressed over the past few months to maybe a couple of years about the number of different social issues that pop up. And I find that I need to every once in a while back away a little bit from social media, because I don't have the energy or skill set, time, resources, any of it to deal with everything that comes up. And the message that seems to be out there a lot now is that if you're not a wholehearted advocate for every social issue, then you are part of the problem.
Yeah.
I emotionally, I took that on for a while, and I was starting to feel pretty low. And then I sat and I thought about it, and I decided that I disagree with that. I may not be a wholehearted, like pouring all of my heart and soul and energy into every issue, but I no longer believe that that makes me part of the problem. I can put all of those things that I have into, like for me, it's 3 particular issues that I put my time and energy and my finances and, you know, stuff into. And the alternative is to just put a thin layer across everything, which isn't very helpful, or I can dump a whole lot.
It's like the whole thing. It's like the skill set thing. If you can just do what your skill set supports and stay doing that one thing, you're probably more valuable than if you blanket everything.
I think so. And I still think that there's value in having conversations and learning new things and having your mind opened up to other people's experiences. I'm not saying that for me, I don't want those things to continue to happen. I absolutely do. But for myself, I needed to take it away from that sense of I was somehow wrong and shameful if I didn't wholeheartedly dive into every issue.
Yeah.
It just discouraged me and took away my energy, and I just went and took a nap.
I think our world is, I have a guy I listen to right now who's talking about how the world right now needs those fighters and advocates, because there's so many huge structures that we've built in our world, whether it's the justice system, the healthcare system, the education system, the political system, whatever these systems are, there's imperfections and there's mass problems in all of them. And then the social issues are rising from those institutional problems.
Yeah.
There's people who are going to be really good at getting in there and like dismantling the old.
Yeah.
And they're going to be really good and capable at that. There's going to be people who are suck at that, and they're going to be really good and capable at sitting with the people who are struggling with the fact that all of this is coming apart.
Yes.
And there's going to be people that are in the background, like step by step creating whatever comes next.
Yes.
And we can't be good at all of it.
Oh, I love that so much.
Yeah, that helped me with that whole thing, because if I could see where my piece of this pie is, then it could help me understand, you know, what skill set I needed to bring into fruition or bring to the forefront. Because if we each bring the skill set that we have, then all of these things will get supported the way they need to be supported.
Yes.
Yeah.
I believe that's true. And I am so grateful that there are so many more conversations happening, because then people are finding their areas that they fit into. Right? Like my 3 social justice issues, or whatever category you want to put them under, I didn't know them from, well, I think one of them I knew from the time I was very, very young, right? But it took me time to find the other 2. And 3 just happens to be my magic number, because that's where I've topped out as far as energy and resources.
Fair.
It might change over time, but that's where it's at right now. But it took me time and being exposed to things before I found those. And so I do think the conversations are wonderful, because it's helping people to find those things, right? You can see the people who are, they're fired up. Yeah. And they're fired up with an energy that appears to be self-sustaining to a large extent, right? Mm-hmm. And that is so valuable in our world. And we can't all have that same energy for the same issue. And it would be such a shame if we did, because then all the other issues would be ignored or under, right?
Absolutely.
And there's a never-ending supply of issues.
I feel like you and I could just keep going for another couple hours.
I know.
But in the interest of keeping this to a manageable length of time for people to listen to, I want to say thank you. I feel like you are leaving me with some good deep thoughts around deep listening, around empathy, around heart with ears, and right size offer.
Okay,
Those are all really helpful. Yeah.
And I really enjoyed the conversation too. It's given me new things to think about, and that's my favorite thing in the world to do.
I know, me too. Which is why we were both so excited about that today. So thanks, Suzanne, for showing up with me here today.
Thank you, Jill.
Talk soon.
Sounds good.